fourth terrace is thought to have been the residence of the leader and the political focus, religious focus, of this area. And this is an excavation map of the last temple on the fourth terrace with the courtyard fence and the large post. I wonder what that post was for. It doesn't say that it was carved like the Tlinkits would do in northwestern coast of Alaska. I think it says Aztec Temple Mound, South Central America, but I think, not sure, but it may be the Temple of the Moon at Teotihuacan, Mexico City, or outside of Mexico, about 50 miles actually. Some facts as we look at it: 14 acres it covers, 100 feet at its highest point, 22 million cubic feet of earth. Divide that by how many cubic feet would fit in one basket that one person could carry. Building of the top measured 48 feet by 104 feet, possibly 50 feet high. Construction began around AD 950, enlarged several times until AD 1250. Remember, it was sometime right around there that there was a collapse. Probably each leader tried to give rebirth to this culture and to his power by adding to the mound. This was done by the Incas also. This was done very much like the in Mexico at Teotihuacan, just outside of Mexico City, the huge complex that just now apparently archaeologists are just beginning to get a hint as to who this culture was and where they might have gone after that place was abandoned. Even recently in Archaeology magazine was an article on one of the temples or buildings, structures at Teotihuacan, and not even a major one, that had been excavated down to one of its prior levels before it was covered up by a subsequent leader, there to see beautiful frescoes or paintings, if you will, of everyday life in that culture at the time. The original stairs here were enlarged several times after 1150 AD. But the original one, when they excavated down, was apparently the steps were held in place, log posts that were held in place by pegs. It's also thought that it may be one time and earlier that there was a stairway that wound up the face of the mound. And as you can see, this was no slouch of a climb, particularly for the infirm. Here we get a sense of the angular and the sharp angles of these tiers and of the walls. On this second terrace, they found that around 1150 AD, after several large ceremonial buildings had been burned, a small mound and a new building was built on top and erected above those burned out sections. And this was done 8 times over the next 100 years. Thus the visible rise apparently in that side of this, what would have otherwise been a flat mound. In the 1830s, French priests built a chapel at that location for the Inuit or Illinois nation who had come to this area in the early 1600s. Several of the French were buried with their trade goods here. And that took place between 1735 and 1752. We're now on the second level with, I guess, in front of us a hint of the third level. This is what it would have looked like, at least at one point in time. This is giving us a view, I think, to the south-southwest, and apparently there's a wood henge that's been discovered quite some distance from here in that direction. And you can see the arch for St. Louis there. As we look here, we can see that arch in St. Louis over at the far left. At least I assume you can. And so out there somewhere beyond that mound, and perhaps a couple other mounds, should be the stone or the wood henge, and we can go visit that. And here's the view to the east. Notice a couple of stockades, whatever those were for. Some more mounds, probably lesser political figures, of course. Quite a number of lesser-sized mounds, all indicating different sub-levels of government, no doubt. I don't know what 30 and 31 are that are dotted. And down there behind that tree is where we were standing when we first started looking at the Monk's Mound. Now theoretically we're walking up onto the relatively shallow third level, and somewhere beyond us there, perhaps beyond that marker, was where the fourth level for the political and economic religious leaders' residence was. Apparently on the third level is where the leader's house was built, and then when it was finally abandoned and dismantled, then covered with several feet of dirt, and that gives us, or they say it does, an apparent increase in elevation, which I'm not sure I sense, unless there's maybe a little perceptible one right over in here somewhere. But it extends over there too. Who knows? After hundreds of years of rain, one of the men who owned this, a man named Amos, apparently farmed one of these terraces. Remember, it wasn't until recently that anybody gave a damn about history and archaeological finds. Even the most revered things today, like in Greece or elsewhere, and of Roman nature, provided quarries for the homes and buildings, civic structures in the communities that they're found in today. So there, Freeway 55, if you look on your map, we're now looking pretty much to the north right there. And the Mississippi, you can see, running from left or south roughly up to the north roughly. It's not exactly on that bias now. Notice a different color appears in the vegetation between here and those far distant mountains, whether that's, or hills, whether that's the difference in the soil and its usage here over the 1,000 years or so, or a couple thousand years, or not, I don't know. But you can imagine the sense of power and authority that was derived from having a right to be on this top level, looking down on probably what was pretty cleared land, and therefore dramatizing all of these mounds that spread out for half a mile beyond your reach. And here we can see an increase in elevation from this corner, but that could simply reflect erosion on this corner. Here's another map showing the location of the wall, or what's often apparently called also the stockade around Monk's Mound. And it's interesting, I'll just read the interpretive sign. The wall was rebuilt several times between 1150 and 1250, replacing an old decaying one, spaced at 85-foot intervals with defensive towers, or bastions, from which bow and arrow combat could be effectively waged, and L-shaped entries that could be guarded. With each new construction, the spacing between the bastions became more precise, indicating a standard unit of measure had been developed. That's interesting, but also that they cared. Remember, they're dealing with irregular shaped logs. Makes you wonder if one human aspiration common to all of us is the desire to attain greater and greater perfection or precision. Here indicating how these would be put up. These two structures. It's interesting if this is an accurate reproduction that the stockade was then sheathed in some kind of plaster or mud to make it difficult to perhaps climb up, or maybe to prevent it from being breached by fire. Notice that the bastion walls are taller than the walls that run perpendicular to the bastions themselves. Might have been a typical entryway, we don't know, I don't imagine. Maybe they do. Maybe there was a log missing at exactly that point in dimension. This gives us a rough size. Presumably they had built in here platforms so they could stand up there and fire from it, just like we'd see in any fortress. This may seem simplistic and relatively short in height compared to the forts we're used to seeing, but remember that armaments they had, this was probably equal to that task.